Welcome to the Deconstructing Data podcast. I'm Jessie Lezak, fractional CMO at BDEX, along with BDEX's founder and CEO, David Finkelstein. Good to see you as always, David. What's new? Anything good?
You too. Good to see you, Jesse. Well, it's been a busy week. I spent the last 2 days driving and going to meetings. So drove from West Coast of Florida to the East Coast. Had some meetings. Drove back yesterday, and so it's good to be back home. And looking forward to welcoming our next guest.
Driving around for meetings. That's new. So not all digital meetings this week.
Yeah, I had to. Every once in a while you get to do some face to face, I guess.
That's great. Awesome. So good news. That's that you got to see the team, but then also we have a pretty awesome guest. I am thrilled to welcome on Sara Hanks. She is the Senior Director of Project Management at GE Transportation, a Wabtec company, and leading a team of project managers who break down functional barriers to solve business problems with technology-based solutions. Her solution combines tools from the Lean Six Sigma toolkit, as well as project management from PMI and design thinking. Let me go ahead and bring her in. Welcome, Sara.
Hi, thank you so much, David and Jesse, for having me today. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, we're thrilled to have you here. Appreciate you taking the time to meet with us today. And we're going to let you kick it off, and would love to have you tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about you, a little of your history, what led you to GE Transportation, and a little bit about the company as well as Wabtec.
Sure.
And what you guys do for your clients.
Sure, that sounds great. So a little bit about the company I work for. So Wabtec is a provider of equipment in the rail industry. So we make locomotives, we make parts for passenger transit all over the globe. It's 26,000 employee company. We operate out of 50 companies. What I do there specifically is I lead a team of project managers, and we're focused on how do we look at the business and figure out how to drive productivity internally? How do we look at our processes from end to end and understand what can we be doing better, faster, simpler, so that we can get things done at lower cost? About me, I grew up with a father who was an engineer, and at an early age, when I showed a passion for math and science, it kind of pushed me in that direction. I went to the University of Buffalo. I majored in mechanical engineering, thinking I was going to graduate and join GE, be in the medical division, and help people in that way by designing parts in the medical device industry. And unfortunately, they recruited by division, and my university was recruited by the transportation industry. I remember walking on the factory floor during my interview and seeing a locomotive being picked up by a crane. And at that moment, I decided medical wasn't for me, and I liked that heavy equipment space much better. The engineering path, though, I pivoted from that really quickly. I learned that being a design engineer wasn't for me, and what I gravitated towards was solving problems. My first green belt class I loved, and I quickly moved into black belt, and I got my black belt certification. I spent a number of years in manufacturing on the shop floor as a quality engineer and a supervisor. But for the last decade or a little bit beyond, I was heavily focused on doing digital transformation. And so migrating from disparate, sometimes paper-based processes and Excel spreadsheets, and really implementing a full enterprise system that extended out even into the supply chain. And then using the data that we were able to create in that enterprise system and apply analytics, AI, machine learning to extract further insights and drive additional productivity.
That's so
awesome.
cool.
Yeah, I love the story. So the story definitely resonates with me because my father was an engineer as well,
Okay.
Mechanical engineer, and worked on buildings and bridges and all kinds of cool stuff. So I grew up with that similar exposure as an engineer. Also went to school in upstate New York, Rochester.
Oh, where'd you go?
Rochester Institute of Technology.
Oh, nice. I had many friends go there.
Awesome. Yeah. So I know the area well. But what's really interesting to me, and I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation, because we often talk about what can one industry learn from another. And a lot of the people that we talk to on our podcast has often been people in the software industry or ad tech or martech. But you're coming to us from a completely different industry, and I think this is going to be really interesting to see where can one industry learn from another. And there's we always talk about whether it be project management or processes and things like that. It's really interesting how people often approach these problems that need to be solved in different ways. But ultimately, when you compare what one industry is doing to another, we're all solving problems, right? And so it's often really interesting to see how we can learn from each other. So I'm looking forward to diving deep into our topics and giving our listeners an opportunity to learn from you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. This is going to be a good one. And so I've put the first topic up on the screen. Excuse me. So for anyone watching, they can see it, but anyone on podcast, the first topic is get more output with less input. And I think that's something also across industries that can resonate with everyone. But can you kick us off on this topic from your perspective, Sara?
Sure. I mean, I think before I dive into the topic, I think what David was saying about learning from different industries is exactly how Jesse and I got connected in the first place. If we have time to talk and answer questions later, I knew one of my growth opportunities was to really learn how to market our work. And so I started connecting with people in marketing to learn from them. So I think it's nice to be able to share some of my perspective to this audience and maybe return the favor. So with the first topic of getting more with less input, if you look at last year in the tech industry alone, there was 240,000 jobs that were lost. And, for people living with the work in those spaces, it's not as simple as we're eliminating the jobs and the work goes away, because things have to get done. So what ends up happening is the people that are remaining end up absorbing tasks that they didn't have to do previously. And when that happens, if you don't make any changes to the work you do, you end up working longer hours. And you compromise your work-life balance. And nobody wants to, add an incremental 30% to their workday without, expecting something in return. And so I think one of the best things people can do when they find themselves in those situations is, at an individual level, you can learn to identify what we call in the lean area waste within a process. And I'll just take you through a couple examples. There's actually 8 specific waste items that can be identified for an opportunity for either elimination or reduction. But some that come to mind include waiting. And so if you find yourself waiting for somebody to provide an answer to a question, that's an opportunity to take waste out of your process. Another example is perhaps you're getting ready to release content out. Maybe there's a news article that's going to go out and you're waiting for legal approval. You could consider that wait time as being an area that shouldn't be necessary and should be scrutinized for an opportunity to streamline. Another area of opportunity to do more with less is look for areas where there's excess processing. My favorite example of this is when people do the swivel chair in their job. Perhaps they get an email and there's some information in an email that they then have to do data entry into a system. And then from that system, they take the output and it goes into another system, and that's another manual effort. Maybe the output of that is transcribed into an email that then goes to your manager, let's say. And so all of those different hops between one system and another could be considered wasteful and might be an opportunity to explore for automation or to leverage AI. And I think the third area that I like to challenge people to look for in order to identify waste is areas where it takes so long to accomplish something and there's a risk of being interrupted. I know for me personally, there's one task that I have to do. It doesn't take very long, but it takes 2 minutes to fill out the transaction in the IT system in order to proceed to the next step. By the time you get through filling out the whole form, waiting for the form to load, and then saving the form. And in that 2 minutes, it's frequent that I'll get interrupted with a Teams meeting or somebody in the office stops by to ask a question. And as soon as that interruption happens, I completely forget where I'm at. And I even forget that I'm doing the task in the first place and I've moved on to the next thing. And by the time I finally catch up and remember to go back to that one task, it could be a couple days. So now something that was supposed to take 2 minutes to complete has now taken 3 days to complete. And so learning how to pick out these waste items really gives you an area where you can look at streamlining those approaches. And I say that from an individual perspective. The other approach, oh, sorry.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Keep going.
No, and I think the other approach you can take is to look at it at an enterprise level or at a process level within a team. And the way I like to evaluate opportunities to improve the process and to find productivity is to do what we call a value stream mapping session or a process mapping. What that entails is actually identifying step by step what has to happen from the beginning of the process to the end of the process. And at each step, you need to identify who owns the completion of that step, what system does that transact in. And then for me personally, I like to go as deep as to describe what's the data needed to complete that step. And by mapping this from the beginning to the end, it becomes very clear to see what different people need to be involved in a process, what different systems need to be involved in a process, and what data is available or necessary to complete a step in a process. And just that simple visualization really exposes the areas in your process that you can target for projects to be able to streamline and eliminate that work, which will then in turn speed things up and allow you to do them cheaper.
Yeah, these are great points for sure. And one of my biggest pet peeves is having systems that don't talk to each other. And so, I mean, that, creates really, two significant problems. One, like you said, it's a time waster, but you're also creating an additional point of failure. And so what happens when the information doesn't get translated properly from one system to the next, because you're doing that manually and there's a typo or whatever, copy and paste or whatever that doesn't happen. Yeah. So that is definitely one of my biggest pet peeves, right?
Even yes. And even the data that should be the same in those systems, like a customer name, for example, might not be the same from one system to the next.
Yeah.
Now it's not even a translation. You can't connect the dots on the data side at all.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have to find a way to be able to make sure those two systems can communicate properly and know that it's the same, same user, same person, same contact, whatever it is, through some other means. But yeah, that's frustrating. And I've done process mapping. I know exactly what you're talking about, and it can be really insightful, because without doing that, without having all the right people in the room to do it, to fully understand who's involved with the entire process. When you do that, you look at this whiteboard that you've created, right? And sometimes you can't believe like how many different steps are in this process, and you realize how inefficient it is once you actually map it out, for sure.
Yeah. we had we were mapping a process a couple months ago and discovered there was a complete circular loop. So the person that was expecting to do the next step was dependent on the previous person, and that previous person was waiting for the next step to be completed to take action. It was really exposed, and it led to 3 weeks of delay because they couldn't resolve who was supposed to go first until we mapped the process and then defined who was supposed to do what and when.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's incredible. It's incredible that, these things can happen without people even realizing it, right? And then sometimes it just takes getting all the right people in the room and mapping out every single step. And sometimes it seems like it's overkill because everybody's like, oh, come on, we got to go through every single step. Well, yeah, because we just discovered that there's 3 steps that could have been eliminated.
Yeah.
And maybe 3 people that don't need to be involved in this process, right?
Sure. And I think it's good to do that too, because it challenges approvals. When you have an error, the first response from a leader tends to be, well, I need to approve things from now on. So you end up with these bureaucratic processes that have excessive approvals. And by mapping them and seeing how many steps there are, those are easy things to get rid of is the unnecessary approvals that built up over time because somebody made a mistake 10 years ago.
Yeah. And we had a similar situation in-house where it was like, we actually increased the number of steps only because we realized that the process wasn't really working with the number of steps that we had, because there was, you have one person talking to another person, getting information from that person. But because that, you had a salesperson that was talking to a technical person and they're communicating sort of in a different language, right? Salespeople and technical people. And so they would go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth until they fully figured out, what the problem and solution needs to be. By adding one additional step, one other person, which was sort of a technical sales liaison to the step, we were able to actually smooth out the entire process so that literally, instead of going back and forth and back and forth, it was one person, the salesperson telling the liaison saying, okay, I think I understand. Is this what you mean? Yes. Okay. And clarifying it. And then it goes to the tech team. And we were able to actually add one step, and it improved the process probably, tenfold.
It makes sense because rework in a process is killer, because if it takes 2 days to do something and then you have to go back and do it again, you've already doubled your
Huge
time.
waste of time. Yeah.
Or worse off, the work gets duplicated and then you have 2 people doing the same thing and no one wants that. And just from a marketing perspective, this is all hitting home to me. Just personally, I've been working with some VAs. So if you work with a virtual assistant, you really have to have your step-by-step down pat. And anyone in marketing who wants to be a little creative knows that, like, you can't say sometimes it should be short, but sometimes it should be long, and sometimes it should be friendly, but sometimes no. You have to have a process down, and you'll get more output with less input. But that's a really great topic. Is there anything either of you want to add on this before we move on to data quality?
I think the last thing I'd say, because, a lot of process improvement starts with that analysis, but you need to get into solutions. And I think when it came to solutions, when I first started these types of projects, 10, 15 years ago, software was expensive and you really had to have a good return on investment to make a software purchase to solve the problem. And now things are so much more readily available. But to help you decide what to do first, I think it's important to evaluate the ideas in a matrix of what's the level of effort and how much impact will that specific idea have. And then you can prioritize what's the low hanging fruit that will have the biggest impact. And just kind of work down the list from there as a way to help prioritize, because you can look at all the opportunity and think, oh my goodness, and get overwhelmed with where to start. So if you identify what has the lowest effort and the biggest impact, it just helps.
Yeah, great point. So Sara, could you talk to us a little bit about data quality from your perspective? So for operational excellence, because we love to talk about data quality. Typically we're talking about data quality of your first party customer data from a marketing perspective, but data quality is a broad idea and term. And so could you kick us off on data quality for operational excellence?
Sure. I think I'll start with just defining operational excellence. To me, it boils down to two metrics. How fast are things happening and to what level of quality? Meaning the level of output of that process or the work along the way. I know, David, you had mentioned rework, and adding a step made a difference, right? So if you look at how long it takes to complete something, including the wait times, and you measure it, that's one way you can improve your process excellence. But you can't do that without also looking at the quality, because tendency is that people speed things up and they don't do them as well. So you need both to balance. And both of those metrics depend on data quality. And most people, when they think of data quality, they think, is it accurate? Is it complete? Is it consistent? But I think it's important to look a little deeper with respect to data quality. I like to, making sure there's no duplicates. That's another kind of obvious one. But when you're measuring KPIs, there's certain things about data that needs to be considered. One of the biggest ones for me is the validity of the data, and the worst is dates. And I can't tell you how many times I've extracted data in order to create a cycle time metric. And in one system, the date format is one way. When I download it from another system, the date format's another way. When you download it from the third one, the date format's another way. And when you're trying to stitch all of these things across, you can't even run simple analytics. You would expect that a very quick formula would be able to help you understand how long it took to get from point A to point B, but dealing with the date formats turns what should be a 5-minute exercise into something that takes a really long time to solve. I think the other thing to consider with data quality when it comes to operational excellence is making sure that the data is repeatable, especially when you have looking at quality. There may be a need to classify something coming in, and it could be the same from a marketing standpoint. Let's say you're doing sentiment analysis, and you want to identify the negative and the positive comments. That should be a repeatable classification. So whether a person's doing it or machine learning is doing it, it needs to say the same answer on a multiple basis. I was doing a training on a chat GPT like thing, and I had wanted to do a demonstration of sentiment analysis, and I put the exact same scenario in twice. And in one case, they called the comment negative, and in the other case, the AI called the comment neutral. And so I think it's important that if you're going to use classification, that people are doing it the same way all the time, because otherwise your data, when you aggregate it and analyze it, could be a little bit skewed. And then the last thing about data quality that I like to think about is the data accessible, and is it democratized? Having great data available for one team when another could benefit from it and you're not sharing it, I think that can be quite limiting. Now, I understand that there's security that needs to be considered, and some data is proprietary, but where it's not, let people have the data, give people the tools, and give people the training so that they can take advantage of that data. But it really starts with that foundation of data quality.
Yeah, those are great points. I mean, we see this data quality, very similar data quality issues across the board in our clients, partners that we've worked with, whether it be date fields or classifications of things like vehicles, where we've seen a lot of car ownership data and things like that, where
Mhm.
fields don't, there's different nomenclature for different fields, and therefore you can't compare the data sets. So that is definitely a problem that I think everybody has, and everybody has seen, and there are often different ways that you have to try to tackle that. Sometimes we've built translation services to translate data so that when it's incoming and it's coming from one source, we can convert it into a format that our system can understand, and we have to translate. We'll have 3 or 4 different translation schemas,
Sure.
so that when we're working with all these different companies that are using different nomenclature, that we can normalize it into a single taxonomy, so that at that point we can then do something with that data.
Sure.
And so those are problems that we see across the board in our industry as well, for sure. Data quality is something that we're always looking at. And it's funny that you bring up the chat GPT like thing, because we've had a lot of conversations on here about different types of AIs, and how you can put in the same thing and get different answers each time. And a lot of people are looking at a lot of this technology. A lot of it is still in its infancy, right? And so
Sure.
a lot of people are looking at it and saying, oh, okay, well, I can use this for that, but maybe you can't, because if you're going to put it in and get one answer out, and you put it in and get a different answer out, then you have to really think about your approach to using the technology.
Yeah. If you need to be precise and your data that's trained the model isn't precise, then it's not a good fit. So
yeah, exactly.
Definitely. Well, I heard a couple buzzwords that I feel like I hear on our other shows too, which was, of course, data quality, but then data completeness, data accessibility, and then democratizing data. I've heard our other guests, use those same words. And then on our next topic, we've also talked about data culture a lot. And so the third topic is cultivating a continuous improvement culture. Could you kick us off on this one, Sarah?
Sure. I mean, I think in order to embrace continuous improvement and operational excellence and help people reduce the input to get the same output, it really does depend on having a culture that fosters transparency, openness, willing to learn, willing to fail. And really that starts at the top. And I think the first thing leaders can do different that's actionable right now is to start to ask different questions. It's really easy to see when you're presented with a scorecard and that scorecard shows red, to start to ask why and to delve into the past to understand. But you can change the question and ask it differently and say, what could we do about it now to help prevent that in the future? And that very simple shift will immediately make it easier for people to come to meetings with red scorecards, talk about the problems, think about how do I solve them, and do it without any fear. You get that psychological safety, and it's a very, very simple thing that can change. I think
That's a huge topic, actually. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I love that. I love that, because it's we've talked, and so hey, so does Seth. Seth loves this topic. It's about, there's a huge, I don't even know how to approach this. There's a huge movement to foster innovation, right? Through vulnerability, right? Making sure people feel comfortable being vulnerable. A lot of times people won't speak up, and in fact, a lot of times the people that don't speak up are the ones that could have the most amazing idea that never gets heard, because of that fear, like you said, the fear that someone might not think it's a good idea, and it might make them feel bad, being told that that their idea is not good. I assume you've heard Brene Brown's work here, and that, she's one that I think has really done an amazing job in corporate culture to improve, this sort of movement towards more creativity and innovation through vulnerability, and making sure that people are willing to be open and share their ideas without that fear of anything, negativity that might come towards them for sharing. And I think that's extremely important. And I think that having sort of that level of culture in your company, in your division, is super important, and to enable exactly what you're talking about, sort of that ability to foster continuous improvement in your culture.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I forgot what I was going to say. I had a thought, it's gone.
I know how that goes. Yeah, no, it's both of you have shared like really great thoughts on, cultivating a continuous improvement culture. So like, how do you use data to do that, Sara?
So I think I personally like to back up the conversation with the data. Actually, I don't, but not back it up. It used to be that you go into the conversation, you give the scorecard, and then you have your bullet point list of these are the things that went wrong. What I prefer to do is flip it and come in instead of with a PowerPoint deck, go in with a dashboard. When people ask the questions, go into the data. I think,
Yeah.
and there's an element of education when it comes to data. I don't think the data literacy is equal. And so there's some level of education that's necessary to help people understand how to think with data. I've seen where there is a tendency to jump to solutions, especially in the event of an emergency or you're in the middle of a fire, not a literal fire, but a business fire. And people want to run and get the bucket and throw and put it on the fire. Well, what if it's a grease fire? The water isn't gonna, you need to learn and understand what the problem is first before you jump to a solution, because you might get the wrong solution and it would end up costing more in the long run. And so, I think what you can do differently about that is to take a data-driven approach to the problems and really dive in and understand why before jumping to a solution.
I love that analogy. But even businesses can have grease fires. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's hard to figure out sometimes how to put out the fire. Thank you for that analogy, Sara. What was
If
that?
I had one word of advice for people in the midst of a fire, communicate 3 times more than you think you need to.
Yeah.
And that will buy you time.
Yeah, I like that.
Great. I've learned that lesson in marketing too, like I think of instances where the technology goes down and everybody and their mother, it seems like, is coming at all of our channels on social media and everything. And so it's, instead of just running and hiding and not saying anything, I found exactly to be true what you said, is just over communicate. Even when we don't know, explain that we don't know.
Yeah.
So I think that, that's another one of those things that can be applied across industries. And so speaking of being applied across industries, we ask all of our guests, what are some of your favorite tools in your tech stack?
Sure. So in my corporate day job, I use Microsoft almost exclusively, or I use company approved, GPT versions. However, I do offer training and consulting on the side. And I'm just kicking things off. I've actually started with a newsletter. My tech stack in this circumstance, I love Notion for organizing thoughts and brainstorming. So I've got I have a content calendar that I've created in Notion, and it's real easy to set up, easy to maintain. And then if I'm doing process mapping, I love Lucid Chart, which also integrates with Notion, which is great. And as a newbie side hustle without a lot of money, I think free is great. And those two things are available to me at no cost. And my newsletter is currently written on Substack for the same reason, but I find that it's very user friendly to get started. I'm a big fan of ChatGPT. You do have to qualify your questions, and you have to make sure that what you're getting in response is something that can be useful. I don't use it for fact checking. I will continue to use Google and research in that regard. Although I might use it to help speed up my process and point me in a specific direction. And then lately, I've gotten interested in using Google's Bard specifically as it integrates with YouTube. I think being able to query content from a video, I think there's a lot of powerful value that you can extract from that. And I'm just starting to dip my toe in to see what that could look like.
Interesting.
Probably not the same tech stack as some of your guests.
Yeah, no, some of it is definitely carries over, and I hadn't known about Bard's capabilities there.
Me either.
I tend to use Bard more than any of the others, and I've never tried to use it to. So, what are you using it to summarize video content,
Yes.
or?
And I've
That's
seen
cool.
where you can ask a question about something in the video and it'll return with a response.
Pretty cool. Okay, I'm gonna have to try that. Neat.
Yeah, and I've got some ideas on what it can do that could be valuable, but more to come there.
I'm gonna have it summarize this podcast when we're done.
Absolutely.
Sounds great. You can write posts for all of us. Very cool. So, well, thank you for sharing your tech stack. I know I've heard Notion on the show before.
Yeah.
But we have a few minutes, Sarah. So I'm going to at least ask you one of the post topic questions.
Okay.
If you could go back to when you first came into, we'll say, this industry, the manufacturing industry, what is the number one piece of advice you would give yourself?
Never underestimate the power of networking and the need to continue to be mentored throughout your career. I think when you're entry level and you're first starting in, it's obvious, and often the companies will help you get paired with a mentor. It's easier when you're early career to ask for help, but I find that as your career progresses and you start to find your sweet spot, do what you're doing well, it's easy to fall into the trap of just being really good at that. And I think that's limiting in terms of growth. And I think eventually it's also limiting in terms of your career path. And so I think always keep that person that's a few steps ahead of where you want to go. Look to them and to help you understand what your gaps are and help pull you up along the way. So I think that, networking and mentoring is really necessary throughout your career, not just as a newbie.
Yeah.
I agree. That's awesome.
That's great advice. Thank you for sharing, Sarah. So in closing, would you like to let listeners know how they can find you?
Sure. The easiest way to find me is on LinkedIn. And in my LinkedIn bio, you can see a link to subscribe to my newsletter. So if you're interested in learning a bit more about any of these topics, I'd love for you to just subscribe. And if you have any suggestions for me or feedback, I'm welcome to hear that too.
Awesome. Well, I believe I did subscribe to your newsletter, Sarah. So I'm going to look forward to seeing it come through, although it might be a little different from what I normally read. But we really appreciate you joining us, Sarah.
Thank you for having me. I had a great time, and I appreciate being able to be here today.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been great.
Absolutely. And real quick, as we wrap up, audience members, You can learn more about Powered by BDEX capabilities, and this will enable you to leverage the BDEX identity graph, all the features of our Omni IQ product, and even our AI-powered audience creation capabilities. So as always, I'll pull up the QR code for anyone who's watching, but if you're on podcast, you simply just go to bdex.com and you can learn more about what we're doing there. Click on Talk to an Expert, and they will talk to you about how to improve your data strategy. Also, if you're interested in deconstructing data and you are interested in sponsoring, we are right now, creating sponsorship opportunities, and we'd be interested in talking to you. So please reach out to us to learn more. But also, if you have any guests you would like to suggest or topics, we would love to hear from you. Please reach out to us at info@bdex.com. Share your qualitative data with us so we can make this better for you. And thanks again, Sara, for joining us. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and close us out with a video. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.